I never thought I'd feel invisible in my own family. I spent decades working, sacrificing, believing that love and loyalty were enough to hold us together. But now, sitting in the dim light of my study, I feel more like a spectator than a father. My hands, once steady and sure, tremble slightly as I cradle a lukewarm cup of coffee, trying to gather the courage to face another day. People think life gets easier with age. Maybe for some, not for me. At 72, I've come to realize that wisdom is nothing more than the ability to recognize how badly you've been betrayed and still be powerless to stop it. I live in a modest house that my husband and I poured our savings into, one that was meant to shelter our family, our legacy. And yet, somehow, the people I trusted the most seemed determined to take it all away. I remember the early mornings, waking my son Michael for school. He was a good boy then, always curious, always laughing. But somewhere along the way, the laughter faded, replaced by ambition that smelled of entitlement. I wanted to protect him from the coldness of the world. I never imagined he would bring that coldness home. People call me old-fashioned, nostalgic, sentimental. Perhaps they're right. I still believe in honesty, in hard work, in the quiet satisfaction of seeing your children succeed, so long as they carry gratitude in their hearts. But gratitude has a funny way of disappearing when money and power come into play. I had my suspicions early on. Michael, my only child, had always been more concerned with status than with family. But I brushed it off. I told myself I was imagining things, that the love of a parent is stronger than the hunger for wealth. Now, I sit in silence, listening to the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, each second a cruel reminder of how quickly time slips away and how easily trust can be broken. I check my mailbox more often than I should, half expecting some innocuous letter, some minor disappointment. But the truth, the real blow, is coming in ways I can't yet predict. I know it, and a quiet part of me, buried beneath layers of disbelief and sorrow, is waiting for it with cold anticipation. I often walk the halls of my home, touching the walls, feeling the echoes of memories, laughter, tears, milestones. Every photo is a story, every frame a chapter in a life I built carefully, brick by brick. And yet, even in these walls, I feel the invisible hands of betrayal reaching for what I hold most dear. It's in this space, between fear and resolve, grief and anger, that I begin to realize something terrifying and exhilarating at once. I can't just sit here, watching, waiting, pretending nothing has changed. No, that's not who I am. If betrayal has entered my life, then so must justice. But justice, I remind myself, is a game best played in shadows, with patience as your weapon. And so I sit, the dim light painting half my face in darkness, the other half illuminated by my resolve. I am alone, yes, but I am not powerless. I am ready, though I do not yet know the full scale of what awaits me. It was a Tuesday, gray and unremarkable, when the world, as I knew it, shifted. I was scrolling through the online edition of the Chicago Tribune, listening to the faint hum of the TV in the background. I thought I'd clicked on an article about the real estate market. I thought wrong. The headline hit me like a punch I never saw coming. Jatra, Michael Reynolds purchases 4,000 million mansion in Lincoln Park. I blinked, then blinked again. A 40 million mansion, my son. The boy I raised. The one who begged me for college tuition and the loan for his first apartment. The one I thought was grateful for every sacrifice my husband and I had made had just dropped a fortune on a house I couldn't even imagine living in. I felt my coffee tremble in my hands. I set the cup down slowly, as if touching it too roughly would shatter the fragile world I'd built around me. My mind raced, each thought sharper than the last. Where did he get that money? Did he use what we gave him? I remembered the 24,000 monthly support I'd been providing him. Loans, allowances, emergency funds I'd never questioned because I trusted him, always trusted him. And now, this extravagance beyond reason. Something had been stolen from me.
But I couldn't yet name it. Pride, trust.
Money? All of it? I called him immediately. Michael, I said, my voice deliberately calm, masking the storm inside. I saw the Tribune article. Congratulations on the house. There was a pause and then that practiced, casual tone I had once admired. Thanks, Dad. Yeah, it's great. You'll have to come by sometime. Something in me cracked. That casual, detached voice, the voice of someone who saw me as a source of money, not love, cut deeper than any insult could. I've been paying your bills for years, I said, my hands gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every month, every loan, Every emergency you claimed. And you never mentioned this? Not a word? Oh, that, he said dismissively. I have my investments, Dad. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. As if my concern was a nuisance, a triviality. That phrase became a hammer striking over and over in my chest. That casual lie, that hidden truth, that betrayal disguised as normalcy, it was all I could focus on. I ended the call with a hollow thank you. My hands were shaking now. My vision blurred slightly with anger and disbelief. For a man who had dedicated his life to helping others, Michael had become a master manipulator in his own home. And me, I had been blind. I sank into the armchair, the newspaper open across my lap, staring at the mansion photos, marble floors, gated driveways, expansive gardens. And somewhere in that house my son was living a life I'd paid to enable. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was emotional. It was familial. It was a lesson in deceit that no amount of love could soften. And for the first time in decades, I felt a dark, sharp clarity. I could no longer be passive. I didn't sleep that night. Or maybe I did in fragments, each moment haunted by the same image: Michael, smiling in his sprawling mansion, utterly indifferent to the father who had sacrificed everything. The house wasn't just bricks and marble. It was a monument to my own gullibility, a testament to how completely I had been used. I kept replaying every conversation, every loan he'd asked for, every emergency I'd rushed to cover. I had trusted him blindly, and now he had revealed, without even meaning to, that my trust had been a tool for his gain. Anger, hurt, and disbelief tangled together inside me, making it impossible to think straight. I walked the halls of my modest home, fingers trailing along the wallpaper, touching the edges of photographs. My own memories stared back at me: birthday parties, graduations, the small victories I'd celebrated quietly, all under the assumption that my son understood gratitude. Was I naive, foolish, or had I simply been too human to see the truth until it was shoved in my face by a newspaper article? My reflection in the hallway mirror startled me. The man staring back was older, yes, but more than that, he was a man fractured by betrayal. There was rage simmering beneath the surface, but there was also grief. Grief that someone I loved, someone I had nurtured, could see me not as a father, but as a wallet. The betrayal cut deeper because it wasn't just money. It was respect. It was love. It was the idea that family could be trusted. I thought about confronting him. I imagined walking into his mansion, looking him in the eye, and demanding answers. But the rational part of me recoiled. He would deny everything. He would charm, manipulate, gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. I knew him too well. The son I had raised was clever, smart enough to cover tracks, smooth enough to spin lies, and ruthless enough to exploit weakness. And yet, I also realized something terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in decades, I had no fear. Fear had been replaced by a cold, calculating anger. I couldn't undo the past, but I could shape the future. I could reclaim control in ways he would never see coming. I sat at my desk, notebook open, pen in hand. Thoughts spiraled. Do I cut him off completely? Do I demand repayment? Do I expose him publicly? Every option carried risk. Every action had consequences. And yet, inaction had already proven its cost. I had been too generous, too trusting, too blind. That would never happen again. The moral battle inside me was brutal. Part of me ached to forgive, to salvage what remained of our relationship, to remind myself that he was my son. But another part, the sharper, darker part, whispered a different truth. Some wounds can only be answered with strategy, patience, and a willingness to make those who hurt you pay for what they stole. I closed my eyes and let the quiet rage settle in. I knew one thing with absolute certainty: the game had begun, and I was no longer a passive player. The scales of justice, long ignored, would soon tip, and I would decide the weight. The next morning, I woke with a single thought pulsing through me like a heartbeat. I had to be smarter than him, smarter than my own son. For decades, I had nurtured, supported, and protected him, and now I would turn that knowledge into my weapon. Revenge, I realized, isn't about anger alone. Anger is the spark, yes, but precision, patience, and timing are what make it lethal. I started small. I pulled out every document, every bank statement, every record of loans, payments, and favors I had extended. My desk became a battlefield strewn with papers, spreadsheets, and legal notices I'd once ignored. I made lists: what I had given him, what he owed, what I suspected he had hidden from me. Patterns began to emerge, subtle but undeniable. He had a system. He had confidence that I would never see through it. He was wrong. I visited the local courthouse records online, combing through property deeds, corporate filings, and tax records. My pulse quickened each time I found something unexpected: a shell company here, a minor property transfer there, evidence of a financial life carefully shielded from me. Each discovery was a revelation, a confirmation that the boy I had raised to do good had mastered deceit. Yet even as I cataloged his actions, I reminded myself of the limits of direct confrontation. A frontal attack would only make him defensive, cautious. No, the true power lay in subtlety. Information is leverage, knowledge is power, and patience is a weapon that few understand how to wield. I began drafting letters, not to send but to clarify my strategy. Each sentence, each word had to serve a purpose: a breadcrumb, a trap, a psychological push. I knew him too well. He thrived on control, on appearances, on the illusion of omnipotence. My goal was to undermine that illusion without revealing my hand too soon. I also considered alliances. Old friends, financial advisors, former colleagues. I reached out subtly, framing inquiries as mere curiosity about property values, investments, and market shifts. In truth, I was building a network of eyes and ears, quietly collecting pieces of a puzzle only I could see fully. At night, I rehearsed the encounters in my head: phone calls, chance meetings, casual comments that could unsettle him. I studied his routines, his habits, the way he spoke, the things he cared about most. Every detail became ammunition. The mansion, the luxury cars, the public image he so carefully curated, they were all weaknesses I could exploit. But as the plan solidified, a darker realization crept in. This wasn't just about money. It was about pride, about respect, about restoring the balance that had been stolen. And, reluctantly, about teaching him a lesson that love alone could not instill. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the stacks of papers like a general before battle. The lines were drawn, the pieces were in place. The game had begun in earnest, and every move would be deliberate, calculated, and unrelenting. The first step was subtle, almost invisible, a whisper rather than a shout. I started with the smallest fractures, testing him, gauging how much he had truly hidden behind his polished exterior. I sent an anonymous tip to one of his financial advisors, hinting at discrepancies in his accounts. The email was careful, precise, worded to provoke concern without revealing my identity. Within a week, I began to see the first cracks. Michael started calling frantically, demanding explanations, his voice tight with irritation and anxiety. I stayed silent, savoring the sound of his panic. The boy who had always seen me as powerless was now exposed to the tiniest fraction of my own strategy, and it unnerved him. I moved next to his social circle, planting seeds of doubt. Casual comments at gatherings, subtle suggestions to mutual acquaintances, nothing overt, nothing that could be traced back to me. I watched as those around him began to question his judgment, his honesty. Michael, always confident, always sure of his control, now fumbled for explanations, stumbled over excuses. The mansion, once a symbol of triumph, became a pressure cooker. I monitored local records and whispered rumors, ensuring that the luxury lifestyle he flaunted was under scrutiny. Every lavish expense, every extravagant purchase became a potential trap. And with each misstep he made, I learned more about his weaknesses, how easily he could be manipulated by appearances, by fear of exposure, by the subtle threat of losing status. Late at night, I would sit in my study, reviewing each action, imagining his reactions. I found a grim satisfaction in the meticulous orchestration, in knowing that for the first time, he wasn't the one in control. I was. But even as I reveled in these small victories, I reminded myself that the goal wasn't destruction yet. It was leverage. Every anxiety I planted, every minor panic, every ripple of uncertainty in his life built toward a larger crescendo. I had no desire for petty revenge. I sought a reckoning that would ensure he never underestimated me, or anyone else, again. Then came the first direct confrontation, disguised as coincidence. I happened to mention to him at a family dinner that I had recently been researching market trends and property investments. His face twitched slightly, a subtle, almost imperceptible sign of concern. I let the moment hang, watching him squirm under the weight of his own guilty conscience. "What do you mean, Dad?" he asked cautiously, though I could hear the edge of panic in his voice. "Oh, nothing specific," I replied lightly, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Just curious about how things are going with Lincoln Park. Market's volatile, you know." It was enough. That single, casual remark sent him into a flurry of over-explanation later that evening. He called multiple advisors, double-checked accounts, and even whispered frantic questions to friends. And all the while, I remained calm, measured, watching the panic spread like shadows across his carefully constructed world. For the first time in my life, I felt the balance begin to shift. Power, once stolen from me, was returning quietly, methodically, and deliciously. By now, the tension I had cultivated was a living thing, writhing beneath the surface of every interaction. Michael was visibly strained. Calls from his advisors were more frequent, his once perfect social composure cracking under scrutiny, and rumors, carefully seeded by me, had begun circulating in circles he valued most. I watched from a distance as the man I raised stumbled, finally confronting the consequences of his own arrogance. I knew the next move had to be decisive. Small cracks were no longer enough. It was time for the confrontation that would expose the full weight of his betrayal. I invited him to my home, under the guise of reconciliation, my voice warm, my demeanor calm. He arrived with that practiced smile, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful measure of each step. He was anticipating normalcy. He was wrong. "Dad, I didn't expect you to call today," he said, adjusting his cufflinks with nervous precision. "I thought it was time we had a proper conversation." I replied softly, letting my words linger between us like smoke. He sank into the armchair I had once reserved for his childhood storytelling. "I've been busy," he said defensively. "Yes," I agreed, voice smooth, deliberate. "I've been busy too, reviewing accounts. Looking at investments. Not just yours, Michael, ours. I've noticed patterns. Certain discrepancies." His eyes flickered, a shadow of recognition crossing his face. Panic threatened to betray him, but he masked it with casual laughter. "Discrepancies. Dad, what are you talking about?" I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. "Do you remember every loan I gave you? Every emergency I covered? Every dollar I trusted you with?" He swallowed. Of course, Dad. Everything's in order. I've always made sure. Have you?" I interrupted, voice calm but ice cold. "Or did you simply hide your gains while I paid the bills? Did you plan your $4 million mansion knowing I would foot the foundation of your success?" The room seemed to shrink. His usual composure faltered. "Dad, it's not like that. You helped me. That's all. You know, I stood and walked slowly to the window, letting the silence weigh on him." "Do you?" I asked, turning to face him fully. "Do you understand the betrayal? Not just financial, emotional. I gave you trust. I gave you everything. And you hid behind it, living a life of luxury while I labored under the illusion that my son valued me." He looked away, struggling to meet my gaze. The arrogance was gone, replaced with guilt and fear, a combination I had orchestrated carefully over weeks. I didn't mean. "Intent doesn't erase impact," I said sharply. "You were careless with my trust. You underestimated me. And now, you are finally seeing what it feels like to be powerless against someone you betrayed." He opened his mouth, but no words came. The room was thick with tension, every second stretching into an eternity. I could feel the scales of power finally tipping, the balance of respect and authority slowly returning to me. Then I added quietly, deliberately, "From now on, every dime you've hidden, every corner you've cut at my expense, will be accounted for. And I will make sure the world, your advisors, your friends, your colleagues, understands the truth of who you really are." His face paled. I had ignited the storm, and he was caught in its center. For the first time, my son, my betrayer, was seeing the full consequences of his actions, and he knew he could no longer control the narrative. The days after our confrontation were electric, charged with a tension that neither of us could ignore. Michael's usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by a nervous hyper-vigilance. I watched him from a distance, noting the subtle shifts in behavior, hurried phone calls, whispered conversations, the obsessive checking of accounts. He had been forced out of his carefully curated world, and every step he took now reminded him of the power he had lost. I, on the other hand, felt an unfamiliar lightness. The anger that had consumed me for weeks had been sharpened into clarity. I wasn't just retaliating, I was reclaiming control over a life that had been stolen by betrayal. For the first time in decades, I felt the quiet satisfaction of justice, calculated and measured. Word of the discrepancies I had quietly revealed began to reach those who mattered. Advisors and colleagues started asking questions. Rumors, strategically planted and nurtured, began to circulate in his social circles. I didn't need to act overtly. The pressure mounted naturally as the network of truth I had built closed in on him. Michael tried to salvage the situation, desperately attempting to cover tracks, explain, excuse, deny, but it was too late. The trust he had shattered was beyond repair, and the world he had thought was under his control was slipping through his fingers. He began reaching out to me, cautiously, almost submissively, seeking forgiveness, understanding, or perhaps merely a way to regain stability. I listened, of course. Every word, every hesitation, every attempt at charm was cataloged, filed, and stored for future leverage. But forgiveness, that wasn't mine to give, not without acknowledgement of the full measure of his betrayal. I realized that true revenge isn't about cruelty, it's about balance. It's about showing someone the cost of their actions while preserving your own dignity. The mansion, once a symbol of triumph, had become a gilded cage. The freedom he had sought through wealth and status was now overshadowed by scrutiny, suspicion, and the fear of exposure. He lived in luxury, yes, but it came with a price he had never anticipated: accountability. And I, the father he had underestimated, had become the keeper of that price. Family gatherings were strained. The warmth that once characterized our interactions had been replaced by polite, wary conversation. I didn't relish the discomfort, but I accepted it as necessary. Justice, I had learned, is rarely comfortable. It is measured in quiet victories, in the subtle shifts of power, in the long shadows cast by actions long considered invisible. In the solitude of my study, I reflected on the cost of revenge. It had required patience, careful planning, and a willingness to confront not just him but the pain his betrayal had caused me. But in that reflection, I also found something I hadn't expected: a renewed sense of self. I was no longer the passive parent, the man whose trust could be exploited at will. I was a man who understood the weight of betrayal, and who had acted to restore equilibrium. And though the wound to our relationship would never fully heal, I had achieved something greater. I had proven, to him and to myself, that betrayal carries consequences, and that power, once lost, can be reclaimed with intelligence, patience, and resolve. Months passed. The storm I had set in motion had settled into a tense calm. But the effects were permanent. Michael was no longer the untouchable figure I had once feared, the golden child of our family whose wealth and charm could shield him from consequences. The mansion, his advisors, even his friends had become instruments of accountability. He moved carefully now, measured in every decision, aware that every action would be weighed against the betrayal he had once committed. I, on the other hand, had found a strange peace. The dark days of anger, sleepless nights, and quiet plotting had transformed into a steady, controlled vigilance. I was no longer a man who felt powerless in the face of treachery. I had faced it, maneuvered through it, and emerged on the other side stronger, wiser, and, most importantly, in control of my own narrative. There were no public scandals, no sensational confrontations in the press. Revenge, I had learned, is most potent when it is invisible to the untrained eye. The world need not see it. It is the shift in power, the subtle rebalancing, the quiet satisfaction of justice achieved, that leaves the deepest mark. Michael eventually came to me, not with defiance or excuses, but with an honesty I had long doubted he possessed. There was a humility in his eyes, a recognition of his mistakes, and, perhaps, the beginning of understanding the consequences of betrayal. Forgiveness, I realized, was not mine to grant lightly. It had to be earned. And whether he earned it fully was no longer my concern. My concern was my own restoration, my own clarity. I walked through my house one evening, touching the familiar walls, observing the familiar photographs. I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. I had endured, I had suffered, I had been betrayed, and yet I had not been broken. My strength was no longer the passive, forgiving kind. It was the strength that comes from knowing your worth, recognizing deception, and responding with intelligence rather than impulse. The lesson I had learned was simple yet profound: power is not defined by wealth, status, or appearances. Power is defined by awareness, patience, and the courage to act when betrayal demands it. My son had once believed he could outmaneuver me with charm, money, and subtle lies. He was wrong. And in that wrongness lay my victory, not merely in material recompense, but in the reclamation of respect, dignity, and self-possession. As I sat by the window, the night sky stretching beyond the city lights, I understood the final truth of this ordeal. Revenge is not a momentary satisfaction, but a deliberate course. It is measured, patient, and precise. And most importantly, it is a mirror, reflecting not just the faults of those who betray, but the resilience of those who refuse to be diminished by them. I had learned to see clearly, to act decisively, and to protect the integrity of my own life. And for that I was finally at peace. True resolution comes not from anger alone, but from measured action, self-awareness, and the courage to reclaim one's power. Betrayal can wound, but it can also teach the strength and wisdom required to rise above it.